G'day and welcome to Reality Check. Before we start this week's show, here's a little bit about our sponsor for this week. Dr. Stephen Gundry has this concept called caloric bypass. He says the key to losing weight and keeping it off is not in carbs or fat or even in probiotic-rich foods. Instead, it comes down to a specific switch you can flip in your body to flush out unnecessary calories. And by activating this specific process in our body, he says he's seen thousands of people dramatically improve their health, even at age 50 and beyond. Dr. Gundry has lost 70 pounds himself using his research, and he's kept the weight off for over 20 years and counting. His digestive issues are gone, his health is fantastic, and he feels younger and healthier today than he did in his 40s. His video's been watched by over 20 million people to date, and you can watch and learn more about it at thehealthyfat.com/Ross. That's thehealthyfat.com/Rost. It's linked at the bottom of this video, and just click thehealthyfat.com/Ross. Now, let's get on with the show. Jefferson Morley, an American independent journalist and author who's written a number of books about American history, notably about the CIA and the JFK assassination. He's an ex-Wash Post journalist for 15 years, and his book, The Ghost, The Secret Life of CIA Spymaster James Jesus Angleton, is an absolute classic. I love it. He's vice president of the Mary Ferrell Foundation, a great non-profit that preserves important historical documents, particularly the political assassinations of the 1960s, Watergate, and the revelations of intelligence abuses that came out during the 70s. And he's particularly interested in this week's JFK Files release. He also hosts the JFK Facts Substack and podcast. Jefferson, a lot of the commentary from this week suggests that this release of JFK documents is all a big nothing burger, that most of the documents that have been released have already been released, and frankly, there's nothing in it. What's your response?
The people who are saying that don't really know what's in these records. I've been looking at these records, and in the last 48 hours, I found a pretty convincing fact pattern that shows that CIA counterintelligence was responsible for Kennedy's assassination. Let me repeat that, because I haven't said that before in 30 years of reporting. But the documents that I saw this week really confirm that impression. Now, what's the smoking gun? I don't have a smoking gun. I have a fact pattern, not a theory. And the fact pattern shows that CIA counterintelligence officers targeted Oswald for recruitment as an agent in 1959. They put him under surveillance for the next 4 years. And when the Warren Commission and JFK investigators came asking about it, they lied to the Warren Commission. They lied to the House Select Committee on Assassinations. They lied to the Assassination Records Review Board. And official secrecy still conceals aspects of what I'm talking about. So what we've learned from the JFK records that were released is this deep CIA involvement with Oswald before Kennedy's assassination, the deception that followed, and we're looking ahead to the documents that we don't have yet. We got a lot last week. This was a very significant breakthrough in terms of JFK information, the most positive development since the 1990s. But we didn't get a lot. You know, I had on JFK Facts, I put out a list of about 15 documents that I recommended congressional investigators look at. Well, we got 5 of those, and I'm going to be talking in detail about the documents that disclose this fact pattern. So a nothing burger, you know, the people who say it's a nothing burger are victims of confirmation bias, and it works like this. Well, there's a piece of information, and Morley says it's important. Well, Morley's a conspiracy theorist, and we know that Oswald killed Kennedy, therefore his evidence is irrelevant, and so we're not going to think about it. What this has done over the years has created this enormous overhang where people come on and are supposedly experts, and they don't actually know what's in the records. They don't know the story of Angleton's surveillance of Oswald. They think that the fact that Angleton had a 180-page file on Oswald on his desk when Kennedy left for Dallas in mid-November 1963, to them, that's a nothing burger because Oswald killed Kennedy. So who cares what the CIA counterintelligence chief knew? Who cares about the 6 CIA operations that enveloped Oswald as he made his way towards Dealey Plaza? We don't have to pay attention to that evidence because one man alone killed a president who he admired. And that's just the way it is. And we're not going to talk about it anymore. So their confirmation bias excludes them from considering, even thinking about or talking about this extraordinary new evidence that we obtained this week.
So, Jefferson, let me be really clear here.
Sure.
You are asserting that the facts now show that the CIA was involved in a conspiracy to murder the president, a coup d'etat?
They were complicit in the events that led to the wrongful death of the president. I don't know who the intellectual authors of this are, but we know that the intellectual author of Kennedy's death was not Lee Harvey Oswald. What we're trying to figure out is who was really responsible. And you know what? I don't have an answer to that. I don't know who killed Kennedy, but I do know that CIA counterintelligence was complicit in Kennedy's death. That's what the new evidence tells us.
Now, the thing that always leapt out at me, sir, was the implausibility that somebody like Oswald, who was so clearly connected to people in the CIA, and even during his military service, he'd worked at a place called Atsugi in Japan, which was the deployment position for the U-2 spy missions over the Soviet Union. It always seemed utterly implausible to me that somebody who'd worked at one of the most sensitive, top secret facilities, a CIA facility no less, in the United States military, that they wouldn't be in some way connected with the intelligence community. But can you please explain to me what it is in the documents that you've seen, the fact trail of documents that you've seen this week, that has finally cemented your view that there was indeed, and this is extraordinary, a coup d'etat against the president?
So, a coup d'etat is it's kind of a political judgment. So I want to be very careful about that. I don't want to put a political slant on this. I want to keep it as kind of objective as possible. So there's a bunch of documents. No, there's no one smoking gun. This is what we see in the fact pattern. Oswald is never regarded as a security threat in the eyes of James Angleton and the other people in counterintelligence. He has some other function because he, like you say, he sets off all these security bells. He said he was going to disclose secrets to the Soviet Union. He got arrested for fighting with the CIA's favorite Cubans in Miami. He went to Mexico City and indicated an idea to travel to Cuba, a violation of U.S. law at the time. He met with a KGB officer known to be, an assassin. And none of this changes how the CIA counterintelligence staff regards him. And they let him go on his way to Dallas. Like I said, James Angleton, one of the top men in the CIA, had 2 FBI reports on Oswald on his desk on November 14th and November 15th. That is confirmed in the latest JFK releases.
Okay, so let's talk about Lee Harvey Oswald.
Yeah.
On the evidence, do you think Lee Harvey Oswald was one of the shooters that was involved in the assassination of JFK?
I doubt that he was, but let's assume that he was. He was not the only shooter, and he was not the intellectual author of Kennedy's death. But if people want to say he was up in the window firing a gun, let's accept that for the purposes of understanding what happened. Everything that I'm talking about the responsibility of CIA counterintelligence is not disputing the notion that Oswald was up in the window. I don't think he was, and I don't think the evidence supports that. But if you want to understand what I'm talking about, let's not argue about where Oswald was. Let's argue about the actions of the CIA counterintelligence.
So just so I can understand your point is that what's now abundantly clear from this week's release is the extent of the CIA pre-surveillance of Oswald prior to the assassination.
Yeah. And so, when I talk about a fact pattern, another thing that we got yesterday was the personnel file of a CIA asset, a man named Augustine Coulthart. He was a professor at a college in New Orleans, and he was a CIA asset. Okay, we got his personnel file. Why is Coulthart of interest? Coulthart was in the courtroom challenging Lee Harvey Oswald after his arrest for handing out pro-Castro leaflets, along with at least three other men associated with the CIA. So we see from Coulthart's personnel file these CIA operatives and operations surrounding Lee Harvey Oswald really for most of the time between 1959 and 1963.
Okay, so one of the things I loved about you, Jefferson, was back in February, you set out a list of what you called the JFK most wanted. There were 15 documents that you said were, not only were they known to exist, so there's no fishing expedition involved, they were known to be in the possession of the government and can be easily retrieved, and they've never been seen in their entirety by the public, which is a complete violation of the JFK Records Act. Yeah. How many of those 15 documents did you get for the first time in their unexpurgated, unredacted form?
We got 5 of them. And so that was great.
Before we go into the detail of those 5 documents you did get, let me be very clear. So, notwithstanding the promise that this is the release of all of the documents in the CIA's hands or in the hands of the archives that are holding these JFK records, there are still 10 other documents in your JFK most wanted list that have not yet been released.
Yeah, let me just explain. I mean, we got about 2/3 of the records that are held, of the JFK records that are held by the National Archives. There's about 1,000 more, probably another 20,000 pages that are going to be released, and we don't know when. The Trump administration has never said that. Now, there's a lot of other JFK documents out there that we still haven't seen. There's the 2,400 records that the FBI found in response to Trump's order. I talked to the FBI and they said, we've turned those over to the National Archives. I asked the National Archives when those would be released, and they said they didn't answer. So those are records that are also out there. And then there's 2 other categories of records. There's records that are still held by the CIA or the FBI that are not in possession of the National Archives. And then there's other records that are in possession of the Kennedy family itself. So all of those are subject to, all those records are subject to Trump's orders. So we've gotten a lot of what we wanted, but a lot remains. And I should say something about the list of documents that we saw. These are not the only documents that JFK researchers are seeking. I went around and canvassed the best JFK researchers on the internet, and I said, do you know of documents that exist that are not in the public view that would be subject to Trump's order? And we got this list. I'm not saying that these are smoking guns. These are pieces of the mosaic. And now that we got some, okay, we see this document. What does it tell us? In a couple of cases, well, not much. I mean, we don't recognize that the names don't mean anything. In another case, an organizational chart of the CIA station in Miami, the information is quite significant if you understand that the CIA station in Miami did not believe the lone gunman theory. And this is another story that's come out in recent years that people in their confirmation bias just say, oh, it's not important, okay? A few days after the assassination, after President Kennedy was killed and Lee Harvey Oswald, the alleged lone nut, was killed, the CIA station in Miami launched their own investigation, okay? And it was a year-long effort, according to one officer who participated in it, and every officer in the station was asked to participate, to canvass their sources and ask them a series of questions. And the series of questions were all aimed at, were anti-Castro, anti-JFK Cuban exiles known to the CIA involved in Kennedy's assassination? A question that persists to this day. Now, we didn't know about that investigation or who participated in it until 2017, 46 years after the fact. The conclusions of the CIA's internal investigation of JFK's death were never shared with the rest of the CIA or with assassination investigators. So one of the items on our list was, where's the results of that investigation? What did the CIA find? Did they absolve? Did they exonerate these Cuban exiles or not? And why didn't they believe the official theory of a lone gunman? Probably because it was factually dubious.
So we have that document now, do
Yes.
we? And what can we conclude from what that document says?
That there was a serious effort to investigate anti-Castro, anti-JFK exiles in South Florida, and that the CIA station in South Florida did not buy the story that was told to the public right after Kennedy's assassination, that one man alone and unaided was responsible. The CIA itself did not believe that story. And that's one of the many aspects that's been hidden over the years. That's one of the pieces of the mosaic that we have fitted in to understand what was really going on at that time.
One of the most poignant things that I noted in your JFK Most Wanted list were interviews that were done with both Jackie Kennedy and RFK. You know these interviews exist, and you know that they're extraordinarily detailed interviews, but it really floored me because I hadn't heard this before. You made the point that Jackie said she thought there was more than one shooter.
Here's what we know, and this is why these are important. These documents are known to exist. People have written about them before. After the president was killed, Jackie Kennedy turned to William Manchester, the historian, and her friend, and asked her to write the story of the death of her husband. And so Manchester went to work for Harper and Row. He was writing a book on Crash Course. And when he finished the book, he gave it to Jackie, and Jackie blew up apparently, and they had a fight. They had a rift. She was very upset with the draft of the book. And Manchester says that he took it back and rewrote it. He said not significantly. I think he said he rewrote 5 pages or cut 5 pages. But anyway, they were not on friendly terms after that. And so they reached a legal agreement. And what they said was all the research materials for the book would put under seal in Manchester's papers, which are held at the Wesleyan University in Connecticut, and they would be put under seal for 100 years. What's under seal at Wesleyan? There were 4 tape-recorded conversations between Manchester and Jackie in 1964, and 2 conversations between Manchester and Robert Kennedy in 1964. So we know Robert Kennedy did not believe the official story of a lone gunman. On the first day, he went to friends connected with the CIA and said, "You guys did this," to 2 different friends, to CIA Director John McCone and to a Cuban friend. So Robert Kennedy never believed the official story. Jackie Kennedy is also known to have not believed it. We don't know what she said to Manchester, but Jackie Kennedy's official biographer, who had access to her thinking, was asked, and she said that when Manchester relayed to Jackie Kennedy the Warren Commission's theory that there were 2 shots from behind, one of them missed, and one of them caused 7 wounds in JFK and John Connally, and the other killed her president, Jackie is reported to have said, "That's not at all how I remember it." Okay? Now, John Connally, who was struck by one of the bullets, did not believe the Warren Commission's theory. Nellie Connally, also in the car, did not believe the Warren Commission's account of the gunfire. And Roy Kellerman, the Secret Service man in the front seat, did not agree with the Warren Commission's gunfire. So, that didn't happen. Yes, eyewitness testimony is unreliable, but if we put their testimony in conjunction with the eyewitnesses, with the photographic evidence, the story that Oswald alone shot the president is no longer credible.
Now, so one of the most fascinating examples of a document that has previously been redacted, censored, and which this week has been allowed to be seen properly for the first time is a document written by Arthur Schlesinger Jr., who was a JFK aide, later went on to become a historian. And he was asked by the president, by JFK, to write a proposal for a restructuring of the CIA. And this came, as you know, after the 1961 debacle of the Bay of Pigs, where the CIA launched an absolutely disastrous invasion of Cuba that led to the capture and imprisonment of many Cuban immigrant Cubans who'd come in as soldiers with the American support. What did... In the original redacted document, there's basically a big black blur over
there's
one
a whole
particular
page missing.
Yeah. What does that document show that is so interesting?
I was calling attention to this document a couple of years ago and called it the most important blank page in American history. And I'm glad that people are picking up on it because it is an extraordinary document. The black page concerned what were called controlled American sources. Okay, and a controlled American source is a source that's totally under control of the American government, i.e., CIA officers under cover at embassies, under State Department cover at U.S. embassies. So that's what, in his memo, Schlesinger is making the case for reorganizing the CIA because Kennedy was very upset. And he felt that the CIA tried to impose their policy on him at the Bay of Pigs. So he's very angry, and Schlesinger offers him a solution. And he writes this memo making the case. In the middle of that, he returns to the question of controlled American sources. And for 62 years, the CIA did not want us to read this page. And when you see the page now, you can well understand why. It provides a devastating portrait of the CIA's encroachment, that was Schlesinger's word, on the president's foreign policy making powers. And he explained how that happens with a couple of eye-popping statistics. First, that at the time of Kennedy's inauguration, 47% of political officers in U.S. embassies around the world were actually CIA agents, CIA officers.
So people operating under State Department cover or diplomatic cover were basically CIA operatives, and they were almost 50% of what was being represented overseas.
Right, and these people are also in a position to report to the State Department. I mean, they have as many people reporting on local political reality as the State Department. Another amazing statistic in there, 123 people in the U.S. Embassy in Paris were CIA, 123 in a friendly country. And then there's the true killer that shows the corruption of the secrecy process is an anecdote that has no national security information in it at all. In the memo, we now know that Schlesinger told this story that it was well known that the CIA station in Paris was on the top floor of the embassy. And it was common knowledge that in July 1961, there was an attempted coup against French President Charles de Gaulle. It was called the General's Putsch. France was very divided over the question of Algeria, which had been part of France for decades. And de Gaulle realized that Algeria was going to be an independent country, and France simply had to pull out. Okay, but Algeria was like Vietnam for France. It was a very painful national division. And in the middle of it, the military people wanted to overthrow de Gaulle. And in the story, in the memo, Schlesinger says that on the night of the General's Putsch, the lights were on all night at the CIA station. And de Gaulle knew it. And de Gaulle always thought that the CIA was behind the attempt to overthrow him. That was in 1961. A year later, in 1962, there's an attempted assassination by the same forces, the people who were mad about Algeria. De Gaulle is ambushed on his way to his country house. And de Gaulle, unlike Kennedy, had a very skillful driver who eluded the ambush, and de Gaulle survived. Kennedy did not have a skillful driver and paid the price. But anyway, de Gaulle always thought that the CIA was also knowledgeable about the assassination attempt on him. So, and de Gaulle never believed the official story of a lone gunman. So, that story, why didn't the CIA want that out? Was that to preserve, some vital national secret? Was it to protect some agent aiding the free world from some dangerous redoubt behind the Iron Curtain? No. It was to protect the CIA's reputation from embarrassment. And I thought, and it's worse than that, really, because I thought, I sent the document to Robert F. Kennedy, Jr. I said, if you'd had this document when you were running for president, you would have had an immensely stronger case about why we need to rein in the CIA, because you would have had this information about the problem that your uncle faced. And I wondered, how many political officers around the world today are CIA officers? Is it still 47%? And the fact is, we don't know. And the reason we don't know is because it's a secret. right? So now we can find out about, well, what's the reality of CIA power 60 years ago? But part of the story is, so what's the story today? And then this is what you see in the JFK stories. You see not just the absurdity, but the perniciousness of the secrecy system and how it shapes political debate and prevents political debate.
On the face of that document, we know that Donald Trump was persuaded by the CIA not to run that document, not to release it during his first term. Is there any good reason that could justify why the CIA tried to keep it secret during Trump's first administration?
I mean, I don't see any. I mean, is it essential to the national security of the United States that neither the American people nor anybody else in the world knows that half of U.S. embassy officials are CIA officers? I mean, I guess it enables the CIA to, trick people a little bit better if they didn't know that. But among the people being tricked are the U.S. taxpayers, the U.S. citizens, U.S. voters. So, the enemy is not the only person that's tricked by this. The American people are deceived by it. And, look at this, Roz. We're talking about the assassination of an American president. And these people are keeping secrets. And then they turn around and say, well, it's a nothing burger. There's nothing here. Move along. Give me a break. Your behavior is extraordinarily suspicious over 60 years. No, you don't get the benefit of the doubt. This isn't a nothing burger that CIA officials are all over a man who supposedly killed the president. This is serious business. Take your nothing burger and eat it. Some of us are paying attention to the JFK records. If you're not interested, you're not interested. That's fine.
Jefferson, let's talk about the documents that show the level of surveillance that have now become available. One of the issues that I've always been fascinated by is the claim that Oswald visited the Soviet consulate in Mexico City, I think in September of 1963. So literally 2 months before the assassination.
It was early October, actually, but yes.
It was early October. Okay. So the thing that's always fascinated me is we've always known that a Soviet consulate or a Soviet embassy would be under surveillance. But as a result of this week's document release, what do we now know about the extent of the surveillance and the likelihood that Oswald was surveilled when he went to meet the Soviets?
Well, first of all, we know that Oswald was surveilled. One of the documents that was released is the testimony of a CIA officer named David Phillips. And attached to his interview with him is the transcripts of all the conversations that the CIA station thought involved Oswald or might involve Oswald. And so, we know that Oswald was under surveillance. And now we know that his voice was captured by a CIA wiretapping program called Lee Envoy. Okay.
So that's new, is it?
No, we've known for a while that Oswald was captured by Lee Envoy. I reported last year a very important piece of this story. The CIA's story is we never took his picture because the camera wasn't working. Okay. The House Select Committee on Assassinations investigated, and they got the records of the camera. And lo and behold, the camera was working on that day. So the House Committee investigated some more. They talked to 2 different CIA officers who said that they had seen surveillance photos of Oswald, but they didn't have them, that they were in possession of the station chief, Win Scott. But 2 different CIA officers said that they had personally seen them. And the CIA denies that. The House Select Committee concluded that the CIA probably had obtained those photos. Now, here's the part where real reporting, which is kind of rare in this subject, makes a difference. In the new documents that were released in 2023, the CIA failed to redact the name of one of their Mexican assets. We found that name. We looked up that woman, the woman who did it. She was the chief of the CIA base, photo base, that took the pictures of people going in and out of the Russian embassy. She was a Mexican. She was a civilian employee of the CIA, and her name was Greta Goyenechea. So she died in Texas in 2008, but I found her son living in Washington State. He also worked on the CIA surveillance program. I called him up. I said, was your mother Greta Goyenechea? Did she work for the CIA? He said, yes. And he said, I did too. I was in university. She would cover the camera in the morning and I would do the camera in the evening. And this is confirmed by their code names. She was Lee Empty 14 and he was Lee Empty 26. So he was perfectly forthright. Yeah, we worked for the CIA. This was very important to my family, military family. And I said, well, what did your mother say about Oswald? And he said, my mother told me after the president was killed and Oswald was arrested, she said, yeah, I took that guy's picture coming and going.
Wow.
I took that guy's picture coming and going. So the HSCA's belief that the CIA was not telling the truth when they said they didn't obtain an Oswald photo, Greta Goyenochia's story confirms that. So, we know that he was surveilled. We know that the camera was working, and that, they probably had a photo that they never shared with investigators for reasons that we still don't know, except that self-evidently they didn't want to cooperate in the investigation of the president's murder.
Do you think they were trying to play down the level of surveillance that they had
Yes,
him?
definitely. I mean, sources and methods were certainly part of that. When they gave the Warren Commission a photo of one of the people who visited, they cut out the background to try and, hide the angle from where the camera was that took his picture. So yeah, there were security concerns about that. But if the CIA had a photograph, of Oswald, why wouldn't they have provided it? And why did they give a photograph of somebody who not only wasn't Oswald, but was an American? And that was an interesting detail that Andres Goyenochia told me. When there is a picture of somebody who the CIA said, we thought this was Oswald. And Andres said, look, that guy's not an American. Neither me nor my mother would have ever told the CIA this guy was an American, because he's not. We could tell through years of observation, and they did this. Greta Goyenochia had that job for about 10 or 15 years. He said, we knew everybody in the Russian embassy. We knew their names. We knew who they were. So that guy was not an American. And, nobody at the photo base told the CIA that guy was an American. So that photograph that they gave, I think it's a red herring. People say, oh, that was so-and-so and so-and-so. That was just something that the CIA threw in there to throw people off the track and pretend that they didn't have a picture of Oswald.
Now, Jefferson, one of the most notorious programs in the revelations that came out during the 1970s was MK Ultra, which was essentially the program that the CIA was involved in to try and murder overseas leaders and all sorts of weird mind control experiments. There was a guy involved in that called William K. Harvey, and on your JFK most wanted list was the travel records of William K. Harvey. He hated JFK passionately. He was very aggressively against JFK. And you've always wanted to know, does the documents show that Harvey paid a visit to Dallas in 1963? Did you get your answer this week?
No, that's one of the things that we didn't get. And again, this is not a fishing expedition. This is based on a story that a man named Mark Wyatt, who worked in the U.S. Embassy in Italy, told. Wyatt was a senior State Department official there when Harvey was the station chief in Rome, which was a position that he had been kicked sideways to after he cursed out Bobby Kennedy at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the CIA realized they had to get him out of Washington. And so they sent him to Rome, where he dealt with Wyatt. Now, you said at the beginning, you said Harvey was associated with MK Ultra. I want to correct that. Harvey was associated with ZR Rifle.
ZR Rifle, I apologize.
Which was the assassination program. Yeah. MK Ultra was the mind control. They overlapped a little bit because the people who were doing mind control also did assassinations. Yep. But Harvey's specialty was assassinations, and he was head of ZR Rifle. So Wyatt's kids told this story to David Talbot when he was writing his fine biography of Allen Dulles, The Devil's Chessboard. And so Talbot sued the CIA for Harvey's travel records. And the CIA said, we're not going to confirm or deny that these records exist. So, which is their classic dodge to not release covert. So their answer actually strengthens the notion that they're hiding something.
So you believe that the man who headed the CIA's assassination program, ZR Rifle, his name William K. Harvey, You believe he may very well have been in Dallas on the day of the assassination?
I wouldn't put him in doubt. I would only go with the extent of Mark Wyatt's story. He said that he was on a domestic flight to Dallas in early November 1963, and he was surprised to see Bill Harvey there. He asked Harvey what he was doing in Dallas, and Harvey said, "Oh, just looking around." So no, I don't know that Bill Harvey was in Dallas on November 22nd. The question is, was he in Dallas in November 1963? And, we still don't have an answer for that. Was Harvey involved in a plot to kill the president? I don't have any proof of that. When we look at this array of evidence, this pattern, we see a fact pattern that points to the responsibility of CIA counterintelligence. But in terms of who was one individual who took actions that were legally culpable and related to the death of the president, that's very hard to determine. And I'm not prosecuting anybody. So I just leave it at, the evidence tells us the president was killed by his enemies. They had the ability to make the crime look like something else, and they could use official secrecy to cover their tracks. And, 60 years later, we still see that official secrecy.
So, Jefferson, you make the point that there are still documents that are now in the possession of the archives that will still have to be deliberated upon to decide whether or not they're going to be released. So this week, although it's an important step in transparency and accountability and a positive one, the Trump administration, to fulfill its promise to the American public, still has to ensure that these other documents are made public. I'm really interested. There's a 113-page transcript of an interview with James Jesus Angleton, which essentially was heavily redacted when it was previously released. Was that transcript released in its unredacted form this week?
Yes, that's one of the ones that we got, and along with the Schlesinger memo and a couple of other Angleton documents that were released, they flesh out this picture of the responsibility of CIA counterintelligence. So it's not one piece of information. There's about a dozen pieces of information. And when you put them together, you see the pattern of surveillance and the pattern of malfeasance.
So the point is that what was suppressed in that transcript, which we now have, is clear evidence of the extent to which Lee Harvey Oswald, the alleged killer of JFK, was under extraordinary surveillance by the CIA in the years and months prior to the assassination.
It tells us something more specific than that, because we knew the surveillance. It tells us about one of the men who was involved in the surveillance, a man named Reuben Efron. And again, this is a brand new JFK story that all those nothing burger people, it's nothing to them. It's not important. But the average person, when I wrote the story, this guy was reading Lee Harvey Oswald's mail while JFK was working in the Oval Office. Now, some so-called experts will say that's a nothing burger. Who cares? He killed the president, so who cares if we were reading his mail? I thought, wow, that's a good story, and I reported it in JFK Facts, and I shared it with the New York Times, and they agreed, and they reported it too. That's the first time that story had reached public print in 2023, 60 years after the fact. So when people say there's a nothing burger there, I say, you don't know what's come out in the last couple of years and how long it took to come out, and why, if it's a nothing burger, why did the CIA say that it was essential national security information for 6 decades? When I have a choice between an academic who says it's a nothing burger and a CIA official who says this is a highly sensitive document that we couldn't possibly release, I tend to believe the CIA guy, right? I mean, if you keep it secret for 60 years, you're serious. You believe it's significant. Okay, I'll believe it too.
So Jefferson Morley, I think we'll have to call it there. But just to summarize what you're saying, whilst there may not be a smoking gun saying it was the CIA what done it, you believe there is a very clear trail of evidence suggesting that they...
I like the term fact pattern. We have a new fact pattern, and that's what we have to grapple with here. And we have to understand what it tells us, what's new, and then we have to look ahead. This is what we've learned by partial disclosure. What will disclosure of the rest of the stuff that we're seeking, what will that tell us? And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. This isn't a wild goose chase. This is a path, and there's a path ahead, and we're taking it. And the path is going to lead us to historical truth about JFK's assassination.
Jefferson Morley, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thanks for having me, Ross. It's been a great talk.
Thank you. Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And please don't forget to click that red subscribe button to ensure you get more of NewsNation's unbiased and fact-driven news coverage.